Nekesa stood by the window, a soft smile playing on her lips as the golden morning light spilled into the room, wrapping everything it touched in a quiet warmth. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the stillness, letting the sun's gentle rays melt away some of the heaviness she had carried for so long. The light danced on the floor like a silent promise, subtle but sure. The past few months had tested her in ways she never imagined. Sails had plummeted, and every day felt like a battle just to keep afloat. There were nights she went to bed with worry as her only companion. She endured long nights when the silence was too loud, when the weight of unpaid bills and any other responsibilities sat heavy on her chest. She remembered staring at the ceiling in the dark, wondering how much longer she'd hold everything together. Yet today, something felt different. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't feel the usual weight pressing on her chest. Instead, there was a flicker of peace, a whisper in her heart that things would be different, that maybe she could start again. That part, small and trembling, was beginning to believe again. She thought of the little victories, the kind smile of a loyal customer, the unexpected order that came just when she needed it. Looking out at the quiet street, bathed in the morning light, she knew the struggle was not over. Something in her stirred, a fragile but fierce kind of hope, the kind that comes not from things getting easier, but from growing stronger in the middle of the storm. She had considered closing shop more than once, often asking herself, what next? Doubts lingered. Was this truly her path? Her spiritual director always emphasized the importance of living one's purpose. Many follow the crowd, he would say, or mimic those who seem successful. But that's a mistake. What you are meant to do will remain undone. The town was already alive with activity. Jerry had opened her Italy quietly as always, energetic and driven. She barely noticed Nekesa walk by. She was already swamped with customers. Nekesa unlocked her own premises and began the morning routine. Customers trickled in, then gradually increased. Just as the days seemed to settle into rhythm, she spotted dogs darting across a small garden. Curious, she stepped out to investigate. The animals had slipped in through a gap in the fence. One she had postponed fixing several times. Leading the charge was Simba, her neighbor's unruly dog, a young restless male, more destructive than helpful. Time and again, Nekesa had asked the neighbors to restrain him. They had agreed, once tying him up in the morning, only to release him again by afternoon. The evening air was thick with the scent of damp earth and charcoal smoke. Crickets chirped in the silence. A banana peel landed on Nekesa, startling her. She turned around, heart pounding, eyes scanning the dimly lit compound. Who's there? Nekesa called out, her voice sharp and edged with fear. No answer, only the whisper of wind through the banana trees. Why are you throwing trash in my compound? Her voice trembled with anger. A shadow darted away, swift and silent, but unmistakable. It was Njora, always lacking, always tearing trouble, always watching, always grinning when things went wrong. He was an uncooperative and disruptive neighbor who thrived on chaos, and he seemed to take pleasure in Nekesa's frustration. Nekesa's once thriving garden, bursting with life and the promise of harvest, had been turned into a playground. The carefully tended rows of vegetables were now just distant memories, replaced by the sound of barking and the pounding of feet. Simba, once content to lie in the shade of the maize stalks, now had become the ever-curious explorer, wandering freely through the neighborhood, often returning with a band of other dogs trailing behind him like royal followers. A well-worn narrow path now cut through the middle of the garden, the earth compacted by constant movement, while the once flourishing crops lay crushed and lifeless beneath the weight of countless footsteps. The sun had barely climbed above the acacia trees when Atino stepped out of her house, a steaming cup of tea in hand. The soft rustle of leaves, punctuated by the distant clacking of hens, hinted at another peaceful morning in the village. She stretched her arms and yawned, ready to water her orange seedlings. When she spotted Nekesa across the fence, standing stiffly beside her garden. "Good morning, Nekesa!" Atino called out cheerfully. Nekesa turned slowly, her face drawn in frustration. "Good morning, Atieno." She pointed to the mess behind her with a sigh. Just look at what Simba turned my garden into. Atieno leaned on the wooden fence and surveyed the scene. Flower beds torn to shreds, half-buried onions clawed out of the soil, paw prints stamped across the soft earth like an invasion. Simba, the oversized dog with endless energy and no respect for boundaries, had clearly been on a mission. "Why don't you contain him?" Nekesa asked, trying to keep her voice natural. Atieno shook her head, her hands resting on her hips. "We will, Nekesa. We've been trying for days to tie him up, but he's uncatchable." Nekesa raised an eyebrow, biting back her response. "Uncatchable?" She almost laughed. Her face remained composed, but inside she burned with disbelief. "Uncatchable? Really?" she thought. Just that morning, she had passed by the homestead on her way to the borehole and seen John, Atieno's son, tossing a stick while Simba bounded happily after it, barking and wagging his tail. The dog had been anything but uncatchable then. She could still picture John whistling and Simba running back to him, tail high, completely obedient. But here was Atieno, calm as the morning dew, standing beside her ruined garden, pretending helplessness. Nekesa gave a tight nod, masking her disbelief with a polite smile. "I see," she murmured, but her thoughts churned louder than words. A silence settled between them, tense and awkward, broken only by the distant bark of the very dog in question. He was probably back at their compound now, chewing on some poor child's school shoes. "I hope you find a way soon," Nekesa added, turning back toward her house. "The garden won't survive another visit from Simba." "We're doing our best," Atieno replied, her tone just slightly defensive. As Nekesa walked away, she shook her head slowly. "If doing your best means watching your son play catch with a so-called uncatchable dog, then maybe you need to redefine your best," she thought. She glanced at her own neat rows of vegetables, still untouched for now, but she knew it was only a matter of time before Simba chose a new target. And when he did, she wouldn't settle for money pleasantries and excuses. By the end of the week, Nekesa's patience had thinned like the worn soles of her slippers. Simba had made a second visit, this time to her compound. Her spinach bed was flattened, the stalk snapped and muddy, and the carefully arranged rows of sukuma were shredded like paper. Even her compost pile had been dug into, banana peels and potato skins scattered across the path like confetti of a chaotic party. That morning, she didn't wait for pleasantries. "Atieno!" Nekesa called her across the fence, voice sharp. "Come and see for yourself what Simba has done this time." Atieno emerged from her kitchen with a rag slung over her shoulder. "What now?" she asked, ready wiping her hands. "This," Nekesa pointed at the distraction, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but fury, barely contained. "You said you're handling it. Is this what you call handling?" Atieno brows knitted together. She crossed her arms. "It's a dog, Nekesa. He roams. You're doing our best." "You keep saying that, but your best is not good enough. My food is not for Simba's amusement. This is the second time this week. What will be left by the end of the month?" Atieno looked down at the plants, then back at Nekesa. Her tone cooled like water poured over simmering coals. "I understand you're upset, but I don't appreciate the tone. You act like I asked Simba to destroy your garden. And you act like you have no control of your own home," Nekesa snapped. "You think saying sorry every time makes it better? It doesn't replant spinach." Atieno's face darkened. "If you're so perfect, maybe you should start training the village dogs since you have all the answers." The two women stood there, the silence between them no longer awkward but hostile, thick with unsaid words and wounded pride. From that day on, the air between the houses felt heavier. They stopped greeting each other in the morning. Nekesa no longer offered vegetables over the fence. Atieno no longer offered matches of salt when Nekesa ran out. Children noticed and whispered. Even the local shopkeeper muttered. Those two used to be like sisters. But the final blow came the following week. One afternoon, Nekesa returned from the market to find Simba sleeping on a veranda, on top of a woven mat she left out to dry. He was soaked, had a swim in the river, muddy paw prints made across the mat like insult written in dirt. She decided to report to the chief, But on her way, the shopkeeper intercepted her and talked her out of it. The shopkeeper implored her to first seek peace and fence her compound well. If Atenio continues disturbing her, then she'll have no option but to report to the chief. You have to be wise and discerning. They were less bothered, and the torture continued. The dog entry was now visible, and dog poop was all over. What will I do? Thought Nekesa. These are very difficult neighbors. They had fenced partially and often made an excuse to cross over to Nekesa's premises instead of using the usual route. So now there was the dog path and the human path. The only solution was to fence properly from Nekesa's end. She made an effort to block all entry points but were removed. Not by the dogs, but someone. Nekesa! Nekesa! She turned, wiping her hands on the hem of her kitenge. Jorah stood at the edge of the hedge, 1 foot already inside her garden like it belonged to him. Yes? She asked, trying to sound too wary. Do you sell shaving razors? I do. Bring one over. Nekesa hesitated, her eyes darting into the narrow trail between the schools of skooma and tomatoes. She had only just finished fixing the fence the children had trampled on their way to the shops. Now this? She sighed. Oh no. She muttered under her breath, more to herself than to Jorah. No, they want me to create a third path. Jorah didn't hear her, or if he did, he chose not to respond. He was already pulling his phone from his pocket, distracted. Nekesa looked around her small patch of green, her pride, her peace. It was slowly becoming a shortcut, a corridor, a convenience. Truly, she whispered, no one chooses a neighbor. If she could, she thought, she would lift the whole garden, roots, soil, and all, and plant it somewhere far away, somewhere quiet. Nekesa! Nekesa! The voice ran out through the morning haze. Jorah again. Jorah was Atenio's husband. Nekesa barely flinched. She was used to the shouting, the entitlement. She stared at the peeling paint on the wall behind her counter, her fingers absently tracing a pattern on the wooden surface. The village was just beginning to stir. Roosters crowed in the distance. A child cried next door, and somewhere water sloshed into a basin. Jorah's voice came again, louder this time. Nekesa! Still, she didn't move. She let the silence sit between them like a locked door. She had long learned not that every call deserved an answer. Moments later, the real door creaked open, and there he stood, Jorah, arms akimbo, eyes blazing. So, now you're pretending? He snapped. You mean you didn't hear me calling you? Nekesa looked up slowly, her face blank. The radio was loud, she said, even though there was no radio playing. The light came easily now, a quiet act of defiance. Jorah called, Give me flour. She stood and hurried and went to the shelf. Ensure you pay up, she said, her voice calm but firm. Jorah let out a bitter laugh. What makes you think I won't? In fact, don't even give me until I send the money. And just like that, he turned and stormed out, leaving the door swinging. The attention wasn't new. It had grown like a stubborn weed, over months of small slights and broken promises. Jorah was once a neighbor like any other. Loud, yes, but manageable. Things shifted the day Nekesa refused to give him cooking oil on credit. She had reasons. Too many times he had taken without paying. Sometimes returning the excuses, sometimes not at all. Her shop, though small, was her livelihood. Every count counted. But to Jorah, her refusal was personal, a dent to his pride. Since then, had made it his mission to challenge her patience, calling loudly, demanding things without courtesy, mocking her rules. Nekesa, for her part, had grown tired of the small wars, but she refused to bow. Silence had become her shield, dignity her resistance. He returned, just as he said he would, surprisingly quick, with the money in hand. He slapped it on the counter and took the flour without word. Nekesa watched him leave. There was no satisfaction, only the quiet weariness of a woman forced to guard her peace daily. Behind her, the morning light filtered through the curtain, warm and golden. She turned back to her counter, ready to serve the next customer, knowing tomorrow might bring the same noise, the same man, and the same quiet battle. But today, she had won. Where is that slashing sound coming from? Nekesa paused, mid-step, straining her ears, one hand resting on the edge of the window. The rhythmic hurricane was sharp and deliberate. It must be Atino's place, she thought. I haven't hired anyone. But something gnawed at her. That evening she stepped outside and froze. Her fence, her carefully marked boundary had been slashed, hacked cleanly in several places, inside and out. She blinked hard. Oh no! Her voice came out shaky. Is this real or am I dreaming? She moved slowly along the boundary, afraid to believe what she was saying. Her mind reeled, hands trembling as she traced the rough slashes on the posts. The wood splintered under her touch. The sight made her chest tighten. This can't be happening. Who do this? Why? This is trespass. This is vandalism, and it's too much. She clenched her fist, trying to stay calm. Her heart pounded. This fence marks my space, my effort, my peace. How can someone just walk in and destroy it like this? Anger surged, hot and sudden, but she controlled herself. No, not now. I need to cool down before I speak to anyone. She took a deep breath, then another, and felt better. Several days passed. Then one afternoon, Jorah strolled past her gate. Nekesa didn't hesitate. Jorah, did you instruct someone to slash my fence? He looked at her blankly for a second, then shrugged. Me? No, I don't know anything about that. She held his gaze. Liar. But she said nothing. Then almost too casually he added, maybe the handyman crossed over by mistake. These things happen. Nekesa felt her jaw tighten. A mistake? Those many slashes all the way through my boundary? That's no mistake. And just when she thought he might apologize, he smirked. His expression shifted. He grinned and tilted his head. But it looks good, doesn't it? She stared at him stunned. Is he mocking me? Is this a joke to him? Then came the final twist. His tone turned sour, almost offended. You should be grateful. That's quality work. Some people pay for such improvements. Grateful? For someone trampling over my space? For pretending to help while disrespecting me? She said nothing. Not yet. But inside, something had shifted. The silence between them wasn't just awkward. It was a space where boundary had been crossed, not just by a blade, but by sheer disregard. That night, long after the sounds in this village had faded into a hush, Nekesa stood by the window, staring out at the dim outline of a broken fence. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from the cold, but from the weight of it all. Am I dealing with a psychopath or what? She thought. Should I report to the authorities? The better option left was to fence well, Nekesa concluded. He lied, boldly, then mocked me, then expected me to be thankful. She shook her head slowly. How easily people cross boundaries, physical and emotional, and still expect grace in return. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Don't respond in anger, Nekesa. Respond in wisdom. Let your answer carry weight, not heat. She breathed deeply. I could shout, call a meeting, raise alarm, but what then? It won't change his attitude. She lit a small lamp and pulled out a notebook. It was something she had begun doing lately, writing instead of reacting. She scribbled, Today, I choose clarity. I choose dignity. I repair what is mine. But I will not silence make this normal. Boundaries are sacred, not just the ones of wood and wire, but of respect. The next day, she called out a local carpenter, not Jorah's handyman. As they began replacing the broken sections, she stood beside them. Her presence was deliberate, visible. When Atieno passed by and tried to make a small talk, Nekesa simply nodded and went on measuring the posts. By afternoon, her fence stood taller than before, stronger, straighter. Not a word had been spoken to Jorah, but the message was clear. Later that week, she wrote a brief letter to the residents' committee. I wish to report unauthorized tampering with my property, specifically the boundary fence on my homestead. I did not sanction the work, nor was I consulted. I have since repaired it at my own cost. I am requesting the committee to record the incident and urge all residents to respect property lines and consent. Thank you. Nekesa L. She folded it neatly and handed it in. No drama, no outburst, just truth, documented and firm. That evening, she sat by her fence, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air was quiet again. In that stillness, she felt something settle in her spirit. Let them talk. Let them guess. But they will know. Nekesa does not break. And she does not bow. The rains came suddenly that Thursday afternoon. The sky had been brooding all morning, and by midday, clouds burst open and released torrential downfall that turned the village paths into rivers of red-brown mud. Most people stayed indoors, peeking through the windows, waiting for it to stop. Business had been slow. Nekesa sat on her stool, chin resting in her palm, watching the water dance against the tin roof like a frantic drummer. Nekesa had peaceful moments, and did see Njora and Atieno for a while. I prayed this peace last long. Then she saw him, Njora, running awkwardly down the path, clutching something under his shirt. He was drenched before he reached her shop. He hesitated at the door, water dripping from his elbows. Is it okay if I wait here until the rain stops? He asked, almost sheepish. Nekesa didn't respond at first. She simply stared aside and gestured at the stool by the wall. No words, no eye contact. She returned to her seat. They sat in silence. The rain roared overhead, filling the room with its rhythmic thunder. For once, Njora wasn't boasting or barking orders. He seemed smaller, less sure of himself. Minutes passed, then out of nowhere he spoke. You know, my wife left last month. Nekesa turned, surprised by the sudden confession. She said I was too angry all the time, too proud. I thought she was just being traumatic. He continued, staring at his feet. But now the children stay with her. I only see them on weekends if she allows. Nekesa blinked. She had never heard him talk like this. I'm not used to asking for things, he said, or saying thank you. I guess I don't know how to need people without feeling ashamed. The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Nekesa studied him carefully. The man in front of her looked nothing like the storm of ego she'd clashed with for months. He looked tired, hollowed out of regret. She reached for a clean towel from near the counter and handed it to him. Dry yourself, she said gently. Then after a pause, would you like some tea? Jonah nodded. If you don't mind. She moved to the back, lit the stove and returned with two steaming mugs. They sat in silence, again sipping, the tension suffered by the warmth in their hands. It wasn't an apology. Not yet, but it was a beginning. After the rain had stopped and the paths began to dry, Njora stood to leave. He looked at Nekesa with something close to humility. Thank you, he said, for the tea and for not sending me away. Nekesa nodded. We all carry things, Njora. We just choose different ways to carry them. He left quietly. And in the days that followed, the shouting stopped. The demands turned into polite requests. Some days he even lingered by the doorway just to ask how business was. Something had changed. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but the soil had been tilled. And Nekesa, who knew the patience it took to make things grow, decided to wait and see what might bloom. Nekesa often found herself wondering about Njora, about what shaped him into the man he had become. There was something brittle in him, something wounded. Nekesa asked him one day, and Njora opened up. He had been the only child of his mother, the fourth wife in a sprawling polygamous family. His father was a wealthy and influential man with thriving businesses and many children. But within the large competitive household, Njora had always been the outsider, the black sheep. His stepbrothers despised him. To them, he was a threat, a potential heir who might win their father's favor and claim a larger share of the inheritance. The rejection was constant and cruel. Yet oddly enough, Njora was the only one who spent most time with their father. helping him run his businesses. He remembered how he used to trail behind his father in the busy yards of the transport business, how the workers treated him with respect, and how, for brief moments, he felt like he mattered. The old man had a soft spot for him, perhaps because he saw something of himself in the boy. But affection wasn't the same as protection. His half-brothers never saw him as one of them. His victories were threats, his effort betrayal. They whispered from behind walls, in doorways, over shared meals. The outsider, the opportunist, Hassan. Jorah was left to fend for himself in a house full of silent wars. His parents' relationship was strained and bitter, a union fractured beyond repair. Eventually, his mother left, moving overseas to escape the suffocating hostility. Jorah stayed behind, and maybe that's where the damage began. Too young and too alone in a house that never wanted him. He had long learned that silence was safer than words. Words could be twisted. Words could be used against you. In that grand, cold house where he grew up, he had mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. Present but untouchable, he learned to act indifferent. He met their hate with mockery. He became unpredictable, sharp-tongued, quick to anger. If he couldn't earn their love, at least he'd command their fear. And yet, there were nights when he laid awake, his thoughts circling the empty space, his mother leaving. Her absence was just physical. It was silence that grew louder with time. When she left, she had promised to send for him, but she never did. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't want to. He stopped asking. Now, as a grown man, the shadows of that boyhood still followed him. When he clashed with people, he wasn't always sure what he was fighting, her or the ghost she stirred in him. Nekesa was very empathetic, but Jorah did not understand. He hated how she looked at him. Sometimes, with calmness, even pity, it made him feel small. And yet, something about her presence unsettled the armor he had built over the years. The two neighbors lived peacefully, and others noticed. Jorah liked Nekesa's company because he gained a lot from her valuable advice. One evening at sunset, painting the sky with streaks of amber, Jorah stood outside, staring at the narrow footpath that led past Nekesa's compound. Her flowers bloomed at the edge, unbothered by the chaos of the world around them. He had come to return a borrowed djembe, a small gesture, but for him it felt like surrender. Nekesa opened the gate before he knocked. "You've come," she said simply, her voice calm without judging. Jorah hesitated. "About the fence and other things," he said, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I haven't been right." Nekesa didn't rush to speak. She stepped aside and let him in. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was necessary. "I know," she finally said, "and I also know the pain when I see it." He looked up, startled, not by her words, but by the way she said them. Not to accuse, not to shame, but with something gentler, recognition perhaps. They sat under the guava tree as dusk folded itself around the compound. She brought tea and they drank without speaking, letting the silence do its work. "We should not allow our past define our future," said Nekesa. "Mistakes, pain, and brokenness will be part of our story, but they don't have to be the final chapter." Every sunrise carries a quiet invitation to begin again, to choose better, to grow beyond what once held us back. There's room for improvement every day, room to learn, to forgive, to rebuild. Sometimes change doesn't roll like thunder. It begins as a whisper, a small act of courage, a return djembe, a quiet apology, a willingness to sit in silence without defense. The past may have shaped you, Jorah, but it does not own you. And as the tea cooled and the crickets sang, he realized he was tired of fighting shadows. He was ready for a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel small. He felt seen, valuable, God's creation, uniquely created with a purpose that he resolved to fulfill before it's too late. There's a proverb that says, "It's never too late to turn over a new leaf." Through this experience, Nekesa learned a few powerful lessons that speak to all of us. First, pray that God gives you good neighbors. It's something we often overlook, but good neighbors are a true blessing. And if you happen to have them, don't take it for granted. Good neighbors are truly a gift. Second, none of us gets to choose our neighbors. Sometimes you're fortunate to live next to kind, respectful people. When that happens, recognize it as a gift that it is. Count it as a blessing. Thirdly, what you do to others will eventually come back to you. Whether good or bad, our actions have a ripple effect. It has a way of coming back, sometimes reaching our future generations, our children and grandchildren. What you sow, you reap. So always choose good. And finally, show empathy, even when it's hard. Sometimes showing kindness, even to a difficult neighbor, may be the very thing that inspires them to change for the better. These are the quiet truths Nekesa discovered, and maybe, just maybe, the reminders we all need today. Matthew 7:12, the golden rule. So always treat others as you'd like them treat you. This is the law and the prophets. Also in Proverbs 15:1, a mild answer turns away wrath. Sharp words stir up anger. Please like, subscribe and share. Thank you for listening.